The termination notice from Manchester University Press hit my desk exactly 1 week after I dismissed my father's warning about the old press. Now I was staring at a £30,000 reprint bill, the bank was calling, and the only person who could have saved me was lying in a hospital bed because of a fall I should have prevented. And the whole time, his leather-bound ledger, the one he'd written in every day since 1987, sat untouched on the shelf behind me, holding every answer I had been too proud to read. I still can't explain why I ignored Dad's ledger for so long. I swore by digital workflows, but the old Heidelberg fixed the job. Listening to the ledger taught me that being ignored doesn't make you obsolete. The problem started with a client. A big one. Manchester University Press, 10-year contract, $100,000 a year. They wanted a 4-color job, tight deadline, and I told them we could do it faster with the new digital workflows. Dad said nothing. Just stood there in his old cardigan, wiping ink off his hands with a rag that had seen better days. I thought he was just being stubborn. The old press can't hold registration like that, he said quietly. We'll need to. I've got it, I said. The RIP software handles registration automatically. Watch. Notice he never raised his voice. He just nodded and walked back to the workshop. I remember thinking, he's given up. That's what I thought. I was 28, running the business, and I'd just proven my father was finished. 3 weeks later, the job came back. Every single sheet, bleeds misregistered by a hair, some nearly 2 millimeters off. The client's designer had a meltdown. The contract had a clause: if we failed to meet quality standards, they could terminate without penalty. They terminated. I sat in the office staring at the invoice for reprints that I'd have to eat. $30,000 in materials. Another 15 in wasted time. The bank was calling. And my father was still in the workshop, running the old Heidelberg flatbed, because that's what he did every day. You know what I mean? You feel the floor drop out. That moment where you realize you've been so damn sure of yourself, and now you're staring at the wreckage, and the only person who could have told you it was wrong is the one you ignored. Right. So that's where we are. Problem established. But let me back up a bit, because the agitate part, the part that really broke me, took another 2 weeks to land. I'm Liam. Manchester born and bred. Grew up above the shop on Oldham Road, a printworks that had been in the family since 1962. My granddad started it with a second-hand press and a handshake. My dad, Frank, took over in the late 80s, kept it going through the recession, through the digital revolution, through everything. And then I came along with my shiny degree in graphic design and a head full of disrupt or die nonsense. Dad's eyesight had been going for a while. Cataracts. He could still set type by touch, he'd been doing it so long his fingers remembered, but reading the tiny print on proofs was a struggle. So I stepped in. Took over the day-to-day. And I had ideas. Big ideas. First thing I did was install a digital press. A HP Indigo, second-hand but decent. Cost us everything we had in savings. Dad didn't argue. He just asked me to keep the Heidelberg running for special jobs. I said sure, but I already knew I'd never use it. The thing was a dinosaur. Cast iron. Manual registration. Took 10 minutes to change a blanket. Who had time for that? Here's where the pressure started piling on. After losing the university contract, I tried to salvage things. I called every client we'd ever worked with. Most of them had already moved on. The ones who stayed wanted discounts. I gave them. Cash flow went negative. Suppliers started demanding payment up front. The ink supplier, the paper merchant, they'd known my dad for 30 years, but they didn't know me. They wanted proof of funds. I sat in that office every night after everyone had gone home. The computers hummed. The emergency lights in the workshop cast long shadows. And every night, I'd look at the shelf where Dad kept his ledger. It was a thick, dark red book with gold lettering that had worn off years ago. He'd written in it every single day since 1987. Every cost, every job, every profit margin, every mistake. It was his brain, bound in cardboard. I never opened it. I was too proud. Too sure that my way was the future. And then the real blow came. Dad had a fall. Not dramatic, just tripped on a loose tile in the workshop. But he hit his head on the edge of the Heidelberg. I found him on the floor, blood on his temple, his hands still holding a stack of business cards he'd been sorting. I called an ambulance. Spent the night in North Manchester General, holding his hand while he slept, his breathing shallow. The doctor said it was a mild concussion, but at his age, it could have been worse. She asked if he had any underlying conditions. I said no. But I knew his eyesight was bad. I knew he shouldn't have been walking around that workshop alone. And I knew, the fall happened because he was worrying about the business I was running into the ground. That's when the guilt hit. Not a little nudge. A truck. You're probably thinking, that's rough, but how does it relate to the ledger? Stick with me. It gets worse before it gets better. While Dad was in hospital, I had to run the shop alone. 2 employees, Maria, who'd been with us for 15 years, and young Tom, an apprentice. They looked at me like I was a kid playing dress-up. They were right. One afternoon, a woman came in. Elderly. Ma'am's age, maybe? Carrying a stack of papers. She said she was from the local Heritage Society. They wanted a limited-run print of an old photograph. The original negative was from the 1920s, and they wanted a facsimile on archival paper. Sounded simple enough. But the photograph was damaged, water stains, creases, silvering. She said, "Your father did a similar one for us in 1998. He used a technique called bromo. He said it was the only way to match the original." I had no idea what bromo was. I googled it. It's a photographic printing process that uses hand-applied ink on a gelatin base. You need a specific press, specific paper, and a lot of skill. The Heidelberg was perfect for it. I told her we could do it. She looked doubtful. "Your father said it took him 3 tries to get it right." "We'll manage," I said. I didn't manage. I tried it on the digital press. The colors were wrong, the texture was flat, the paper didn't take the ink properly. I spent 2 days. Ruined 100 sheets of expensive archival stock. Maria watched me from the door, arms crossed, saying nothing. Tom tried to help, but I snapped at him. The Heritage Society called to cancel. The woman was polite, but I could hear the disappointment. "I'll ask the museum in Salford," she said. "They still do traditional methods." I hung up and sat on the workshop floor, surrounded by crumpled paper, the Heidelberg looming over me like a monument to everything I'd dismissed. And I finally reached for that ledger. It was heavier than I remembered. The cover was sticky with ink from decades of handling. I'd opened it to a random page, somewhere in 1995. Dad's handwriting, tight, neat, abbreviations I didn't understand. But there was a section titled, "Bromo, Recipe Number 3. He'd written down every ingredient, every mixing time, every pressure setting for the press, every note from his mistakes. First attempt, too much glycerin, ink wouldn't take. Second, gelatin too thick, blocked the highlights. Third, bingo. I kept flipping. There were entries for every job he'd ever done. Cost breakdowns, supplier contacts, client notes. Mrs. Henshaw likes a warm tone on her Christmas cards. The Archbishop's letterhead, use heavier paper, he signs with a fountain pen. University job, check registration tight, they always complain. And then I found the page for 2007. The year my mother died. I'd never really talked to Dad about that time. I was 19, away at uni, and when I came back, he'd already buried her, already sorted everything, already kept the business running. The ledger told me how. He'd worked double shifts for 6 months, wrote every order by hand, didn't take a single day off. The margins were thinner than usual, but he never missed a delivery. I closed the book and put my forehead on it. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour. Maybe more. Here's where the climactic moment happens, right around the 60% mark, as instructed. The next morning, I went to the hospital. Dad was sitting up, reading a newspaper with a magnifying glass. He looked old. Tired. But when he saw me, he smiled. "All right, son?" "Not really," I said. I told him about the Heritage Society. About the university. About the money. He listened. Then he said, "Pass me my phone." I gave it to him. He scrolled through his contacts, slowly, because the screen was small, and found a name. Arthur Daly. Used to work at the University Press. Retired now. He'll sort it. Dad, they terminated the contract. Arthur doesn't work for the university anymore. He works for the archive. They need a printer for the museum's new exhibition. He called me last month. I said you'd handle it. I stared at him. "You didn't tell me. You weren't ready to hear it," he said. "You needed to fall first." That's the thing about my father. He never gloats. He never says "I told you so." He just waits. And when you're finally ready, he hands you the answer like it was never a secret. I called Arthur. He remembered Dad. Yes, they needed a printer. Limited edition facsimiles of Victorian maps. Difficult job. Could we do it? I said yes. But this time, I didn't say it with arrogance. I said it knowing I had no idea how, and that was fine. Because I had the ledger. I had the Heidelberg. And I had my father, still teaching me, even from a hospital bed. The solution wasn't a single moment. It was a process. And it started with the tool no one else could use, the Heidelberg flatbed press. I spent a week learning how to operate it. Maria showed me the basics. Tom found a manual online from 1964. I read it cover to cover. Then I read Dad's ledger entries for every job he'd run on that press. There were hundreds. He'd written notes in the margins. Pressure too high, see page 43. Ink tack needs adjustment if humidity over 70%. I did a test run for the map job. It took me 6 attempts before the registration was perfect. The 7th sheet, I pulled and looked at it under a magnifying glass. It was flawless. The same texture, the same depth, the same quality that had made Dad's reputation. I printed the entire batch over 3 days. Maria helped with the cutting. Tom did the packing. And when Arthur came to collect them, he opened one of the boxes, took out a sheet, held it up to the light, and nodded. "Your father's work," he said. "No," I said. "Mine." "But I used his method." Arthur smiled. "Tell Frank I said hello? And tell him the museum wants to order more." That was the first win. But the real payoff came 2 months later. The bank had given me an ultimatum: pay down the debt, or lose the building. I had a meeting with the manager, a young guy named Reeves who couldn't have been more than 30. He'd already written off the business. I walked in with a folder, not a spreadsheet, not a PowerPoint. A folder with actual paper. Dad's ledger, photocopied. The Heritage Society order. The museum contract. A letter from Arthur confirming a 3-year deal. Reeves looked at it. He called in a senior manager, a woman in her 50s who'd been with the bank for 20 years. She recognized my father's name. She looked at the ledger pages. "Your father kept this by hand?" "Every day since 1987, I said. "It's got every job, every cost, every lesson he learned. I've been using it to run the business. It's more accurate than your software." She laughed. Not mean, just surprised. "That's not how we usually do risk assessment." "I know," I said. "But the new system failed. The old one didn't." She approved the restructuring. Gave us 12 months to recover. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital to pick up Dad. He'd been discharged that morning. I helped him into the car. He looked out the window as we drove past the shop. "You kept it going," he said. "Not without help," I said. He didn't say anything. But when we got home, the flat above the shop, same one he'd lived in for 40 years, he went straight to the shelf in the living room. The one with the framed photograph. It was a picture of him and my mother, standing in front of the Heidelberg in 1982. She was holding a proof, both of them covered in ink, laughing. He picked it up. Handed it to me. I want you to have this. Dad, that's you and Mum. I know. Keep it. Show it to your kids one day. Tell them the press is still running. That's where the story could end. And maybe for most people, that would be enough. But the quietest victory came a few weeks later. A letter arrived. Official looking. From the university. I opened it expecting a final invoice. It was a request. They'd heard we were doing the museum work. Could we quote for a small job, a commemorative booklet for their centenary? The designer who'd complained about the misregistration? She'd left. The new one had seen our museum prints. Wanted the same quality. I took the letter to Dad. He read it, then put it on the table. Your call, he said. I quoted them. They accepted. We printed the booklet. On the digital press? No. On the Heidelberg. Because I knew how to run it now. Because I'd learned that the new way wasn't always the right way. And because the old man who'd been written off had taught me something no software could ever replace. They called him finished. Then they called him back. But this time, they called me. Notice he never raised his voice. He never said, I told you so. The room said it for him. The ledger said it. The print quality said it. And when Arthur from the museum called to say the exhibition preview was a success, and that the director wanted to meet the printer, I drove Dad to the museum. He walked in, slightly stooped, still wiping his hands on a rag he'd brought from the shop. The director shook his hand and said, We're so glad you could make it, Mr. Whitaker. And Dad said, It's my boy's work. I just showed him where the pressure gauge is. That's it. That's the wisdom. Not revenge, not arrogance, not a big speech. Just a quiet turn, the old way proving itself, the young man learning to listen, and the respect arriving late but truly. I still have the ledger. It's on my desk now. I add to it every day. In pencil, like Dad did. Because someday, someone else is going to think they know better. And when they fall, they'll need that book. They always do. If you've ever been the one written off, or the one doing the writing off, I'd love to hear about it. What was the moment you realized experience still mattered? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. His dad said you needed to fall first. Would you have listened? If this story made you feel the ache of ignored wisdom, hit like. If you've eaten your pride to learn from someone older, you belong here.